Three, two, one. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cioriia podcast. In this episode, we are going to talk about heuristics or the art of problem solving. Today, I have with me a great friend and a mentor, Thabo. We were colleagues in Buehler, where I used to work as a junior data scientist from 2019 to the end of 2020. And me and Thabo actually worked together on a nice series of internal lectures on probability. That was quite fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a highlight of my professional career thus
Yeah,
far.
me as well. Me as well. Can you say a few words about yourself, Thabo?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, as Christian's mentioned, we were colleagues at Buehler. I am currently a computer science teacher. I am a classroom teacher, but from September I will be head of computer science at a high school called Isaac Newton Academy,
Awesome.
and that's in London. I've been a teacher for quite a long time, and problem solving is an area where Chris and I share quite a lot of backstory and interest. Absolutely, it's interesting that Chris, you're doing the interviewing because I would say that of the two of us, you're the more hardcore problem solver. I just do the fluffy talking about it bit.
Probably, I think you definitely have the classroom teaching part of problem solving got together.
It's
Definitely,
generous of you to
you're
say.
one of the greatest talkers actually that I've ever met. In my opinion, the way that you present the ideas, it's always like insightful, and I always
I
like
appreciate
hearing
that.
you talk.
Thank
And
you.
but in terms of going for solving diverse problems and so on, I think
Hmm.
a physics degree kind of gives you that edge in terms of
Absolutely,
being used to uh,
absolutely.
diverse problems and so on and so forth. Thank you very much for joining. And also, one thing that you didn't say about yourself, Thabo, you've read a lot. You,
I do read a lot. Yeah.
yes, you read a lot, and I'm sure that by the end of this podcast, it will be very clear for for everybody that this is actually the case.
Hopefully,
And
and hopefully not too obnoxious.
as support for this episode, actually, we had a book that was recommended by you, and I think
Yep.
you read it a long time before I did, isn't it?
No,
The
not so
book.
much. I'd only really kind of got a couple of chapters in. So the book is How to Solve It,
By
by
Polya.
Polya, and it is a book on heuristics. He's building on the work of other great mathematicians who've worked on heuristics, people like Leibniz and people like Bolzano. But it's more of a classroom focused book. Like he's taking those very high level ideas and he's breaking it down to the point where a maths teacher would use that in a classroom, whether at A level or undergraduate or wherever. Yeah.
Did you find value in getting through the book, going through the book?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting. There are certain big ideas in that book, right? The idea of using all the data, the idea of constantly refocusing on the unknown. I do wonder though if it's in some ways more about the teacher than the student. If it's something. So I've been reflecting on this a lot, and obviously I've got an exam class, A level exam class currently in maths, and I do wonder if actually it's to reassure me as much as it is to help the students. I guess let me dig into that a little bit. I guess what I'm
Yeah,
saying
for
is
sure.
you and I have like a top level view of problem solving. We've solved a lot of problems in many different domains. By the time you've done a university level theoretical physics degree or maths degree, you've done some set theory, you've done some topology, you've done whatever you've specialized in. So you see the similarities. Whereas these kids haven't seen that.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
know, they've done the stream that was put in front of them, and so I do wonder whether that kind of high level view is actually more reassuring to us who can see that generalization than it is to them. But anyway, we'll get into that a bit more. I'm
Yeah,
sure
of course,
later
of
on.
course. Apart from this book about Polya, have you actually come across any other book on heuristics? Because this is
Quite,
actually a I think it's a very important topic to just be aware of for itself. And maybe I'll give a background to why I believe this. In my first podcast, actually, that I published, um, that was on how becoming a theoretical physicist. we actually talked at one point that a physics degree gives you a lot of problems, and some of them have these tricks that you need to use to solve it. But like looking at these problems and seeing the trick and then seeing how it works, it kind of makes sense at some point. You can accept it. But for the life of me, like for the life of everybody, seeing a trick and then using it and imagining how that the person that actually came up with it came to that point, it's completely opaque. Nobody knows. And physics, especially physics, has a lot of these sort of points that you meet with a problem or with a topic in maybe theoretical physics, usually theoretical physics, because that involves a lot of mathematics, and then you're presented with a trick, and then you have to accept it, but you do that consistently a lot of times. And we are never told how all these great tips, all these great tricks came up to be. Nobody talks about that, so that's why I chose to focus on this specific topic.
Absolutely. And of course there've been quite a lot of books on heuristics. I think it comes in and out of fashion. So Marcus de Sotoy, the chair of public understanding of science at Cambridge, an author that I really respect, he released a book this year called Thinking Better, which is a book of heuristics. Leibniz looked extensively at heuristics, as I kind of mentioned before. Gödel, the great logician, was in his writings was going to do a work of heuristics. There's actually been an amazingly large amount written on it. It's interesting that you and I are so far down our academic careers and we'd never heard of it, right? Yeah. But I do think sometimes, I think you hit on an important point, which is the tricks thing. I think it's sometimes a little bit dangerous to categorize all the tricks that you have learned and call them heuristics, because it does get away from how challenging it is to learn that trick initially. And I do wonder, if you knew all the heuristics possible, would it help you to see the next trick, or is it simply a way of categorizing the tricks you've already learned?
Yeah,
if you see what I mean.
No, it is an interesting question. For sure, we were going to try to answer that specific question. I think the answer lies somewhere in the area of creativity and how people come to be creative and so on. And it doesn't need to be, talking about problem solving now, but I think an artist can be as much of a problem solver as a physicist or mathematician. So there is definitely a lot of overlap there. Before we go further into the questions, I would like just to give to expand a bit on what the book is. So, as you mentioned, How to Solve It by Polya helps people understand the basics of heuristics, and it especially, what is interesting about the book is that it is split in 4 chapters. So we have In the Classroom. The second one is How to Solve It, where he actually goes through some, let's say, heuristic methods. And then a short dictionary of heuristics, where you actually come to face with some problems which are solved by using heuristics. And then the last chapter is Problems. It's just a cute list of problems that ideally you would solve by using the tricks of the book. But if you are just experienced with solving problems in general, I don't think you necessarily need a book for that. Okay, so that's the book. Before we go any further, could you name a few problem solvers apart from the ones that you did already? So you mentioned Leibniz, and then you mentioned
Gödel as well.
Gödel, okay, that have actually worked on heuristics. Can you give a few other names?
Yeah, so I think so. Great problem solvers and so I think it's a really interesting question. And you mentioned that artists can be problem solvers just the same as everybody else. And kind of when you said that, I was thinking actually more about like sports. And I think you have some great problem solvers in sports, and people who kind of have that heuristic and meta view of problem solving. So like I was thinking of kind of Muhammad Ali.
Okay. Can you expand a bit? It's an interesting point that you make.
So I guess the problem solving, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about, would your viewers have a definition of problem solving which would be rigorous enough to to match with, you can be prejudiced about problem solving. You think your problems are the only problems. But I suppose problem solving is like pattern recognition, kind of logical inference, kind of that idea of constantly looking back for the unknown, starting with the end in mind. And I think when you look at Muhammad Ali and his pattern recognition abilities, you are looking at something truly special. It's one thing sitting and thinking very hard, but it's quite another thing to spot the patterns while you're being slugged by someone like George Foreman, and then doing that on paper in advance of the fight. And you've got a couple of people like that. So Anderson Silva in the UFC, who his whole thing was he wouldn't really throw a punch in the first round because he was trying to figure you out.
Oh, right. Okay.
So he'd watch the patterns, he'd get the timing, he'd get the distance, and he wouldn't fight back. He'd duck, he'd get hit a couple of times. And then in the second round, the fight would start. And by that point, he's solved the problem. And then he just starts slugging. And
what was his how do you call it, like a score, as in wins, losses? What do you call that?
So for the period that he was the middleweight champion, he was consensus the greatest middleweight champion of all time. The problem came because of the high stakes in fighting.
Also,
that when he started
middleweight, so that's super competitive, isn't it?
Super competitive, big guys. You got people who could realistically fight in the heavyweight division. You got people who could realistically fight in lightweight. So you've got the whole roster.
Yeah.
And so what happened is he started to get old, and then that style of taking the first round off, you just have to get hit once, and then it doesn't work anymore. And that's what happened. So he won maybe 10 on in a row, which is unheard of in MMA. And then he got knocked out the first time. He broke his leg the second time and never really fought again. But that's an extreme example.
Yes. It's a fun example nonetheless. Also a creative one.
Yeah. And another story, quite an iconic story of problem solving. I suppose this isn't heuristics per se. But Charles Darwin, when he was a boy, used to collect bugs. And there's this story of him looking underneath some bark on his family's estate and finding 3 giant beetles. And he had to take them home, right? Because he's got to get them to his collection. And so what he did was he put one in left hand, one in right hand, one in his mouth, and ran all the way home. Right. Problem solving. What's the unknown? What are you trying to accomplish? Well, I'm trying to get 3 bugs home. What's the data? What do you have? Well, I have 3 bugs, and I have 3 things that I could realistically hold the bug in. Maybe I could go down my shirt as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure.
Do you know what I mean?
That's an interesting one.
That's open-minded problem solving to my mind.
That was written in his autobiography, or maybe not autobiography. But...
Yeah, it's probably not true, right? But it's a fun story.
Gosh, his mouth a beetle. Wow. Yeah, he really was into his collection, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So also Darwin himself. I mean, maybe we can say that most usually people. You mentioned the thing about the listeners wouldn't have necessarily a good definition of heuristics. Probably, yeah, most people, what they would think of problem solver would be a scientist, sort of. I think that's kind of the first type of person that comes to mind.
Yeah.
So Darwin would be in that category, but you also mentioned athletes. I kind of hinted towards artists also.
Yeah.
Would you be able to... Okay, so this is kind of our intuition so far. Would you be able to say the disciplines, in your opinion, what are the disciplines that are closest to problem solving? So we named these 3, like very broad, right? But
a great question. And I think you've got, again, I don't necessarily want to reveal my own prejudices because I only know what I know, and there's other things I don't know. I do think there's something to be said for chess in terms of, because I think it gives us a really nice objective measure. So a chess grandmaster in competition burns often in the region of 6,000 calories a day. And to put that in context, a marathon takes about 2,500.
Yeah.
So these people sitting in chairs are burning, I mean, it's not perfect, but twice as many calories as a marathon would. There's something going on up there, right? And I think, so I play chess, and I think in terms of raw pattern recognition, logical reasoning, considering of unknowns, I think it's hard to argue that chess is the most hardcore problem-solving pursuit. But there are other ways of looking at the problem. This is just a single metric.
Right. So you mentioned that, again, chess masters consume or burn 6,000 calories, or I guess it's relatively per hour. They burn twice as much as a marathon runner would.
Something insane like that, yeah.
Yes, something like that. So, but that is just goes some length to show that we believe problem solving is only about like using your mind somehow.
Yes.
Can problem solving be done without necessarily using your brain in that sort of manner, or is it like because animals have like little brains, but the problems that they can solve, it's crazy, right? Sometimes
remarkable. If you look at birds, their problem solving is incredible when you consider the size of their brains to our brains.
Exactly.
And you see the mathematical problems they can solve.
So is it only like you need a big brain to kind of solve problems, or maybe?
Yeah. So again, that's a great question. I'd not really thought about it, and it's a great challenge. I guess what I would possibly say is it's a bit like embedded programming, right? If you're, because I once heard it described that the brain is a map. It's a map of your body, and it's to some degree a map of your world and your ancestors' worlds. I suppose if you take that analogy to its conclusion, it may be that a smaller map might be a better map if it is a more fit for purpose map.
Right.
But then within that, I suppose then you want to think about, given that they simply have a better representation of the world than we do with regards to a certain problem, are they still doing something similar? And I think the answer is probably yes. But what does pattern recognition look like to an animal that is almost entirely designed to solve a geometric problem? So yeah, I don't think that's an answer. That's more of a question back at your question, really.
Yes, and I don't mind it at all. One thing that you said about having a better map for the task at hand, I think there is this quote that maybe, is it misquoted to Albert Einstein? I don't know. Like, don't judge a fish on how well he rides a bike or something like that.
Yeah, I think I've heard something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's about that, because when we say problem solving, okay, a bee kind of solves its own problem. It kind of has its own cycle, has its own problems, has its own solutions, and does it really well. It's a really small map for a really small world, but the efficiency is there. But then you couldn't ask a bee to solve the problems of a dog, I guess. Maybe that's
absolutely.
What we're talking about.
And I think listening to you talk makes me think, actually, that that maybe they don't solve problems in the way we mean solving problems. So Bobby Fischer, if you want to take the person who may be the greatest chess problem solver of history, he once said that the game of chess is the game of playing all the possible wrong moves in your head, so that on the board you play the right move. And I do think there is something about trial and error in a cognitive sense, which is crucial to problem solving. So I do think that possibly, so backpedaling from my initial position, that if you were completely designed to solve a problem which we externally view as a problem, there's not really any trial and error. You just happen to have evolved into a niche, and you're not necessarily engaging in what we would describe as problem solving. You don't have to revisit the data. You don't have to revisit the unknown. You don't have to constantly reflect and iterate. You're just designed for it. It's your ecosystem.
talking about that, because now there is actually some metrics that we can compare animals, and it's actually one example from the book. And the last few lines of the book before the problem section of the book, How to Solve It by Polya, and it was talking about and it's actually maybe a problem it's a question that I can ask you and ask other people as well. So it was comparing the way, or maybe it was not, maybe it was actually an experiment being run. So you had a fence that was, so you can imagine a rectangle, and the one side of the rectangle it's open, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you place an animal on the side of the rectangle opposite to the open side. So it's basically a U facing away from the animal. And then you place some food in the U. The animal can smell the food, right? And then it was comparing, I think, a monkey, a hen, and a dog in terms of how do they actually reach the food. And they were saying the monkey is like super easy, you know, it climbs the wall or whatever, the fence, and it just grabs the food. Maybe we can even imagine that the fence it's actually open so they can see the food, right? But they can, right?
Yeah.
So the monkey very easy climbs the wall, gets the food, easy. The dog starts barking, maybe tries to kind of break through the fence, maybe burrow under, something like that. After half an hour, maybe, I don't know, goes round the fence and eats the food. A hen cannot solve the problem.
Interesting.
Apparently. That's what Polya says. The hen just looks at the food, gets frustrated, and maybe, just maybe, out of luck, after many random steps, the hen reaches the other side of the fence, and then there is a straight path to the food, and then it gets the food. So in terms of that, because now we have a common metric between these animals. We can compare this is a problem, right? Let's say we actually starve the animals a bit on purpose, and then we give them this food. So it's a problem. They have to eat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then they go about solving the problem. So I guess in a sort of sense we can compare like problem solving ability.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. Once again, Chris, you've done that thing. So for your viewers should be aware that you say I read a lot of books, but I read them with 80% attention.
No.
And then when you read them in detail, and then you ask me questions, and I'm like,
no,
does it say that? Does it really? Did it say that? Okay. Well, let's roll with it.
I just remember that part, but
So, I mean, chickens are notoriously stupid animals, right? So I completely believe that that's the case. Yeah, so I suppose we're saying the unknown is the route to the food.
Yeah, the path, right.
The path to the food. Yeah, it's interesting. It's one thing that's particularly interesting is the pattern recognition. So animals definitely recognize. Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he did a lot of research on the two systems and the recognition system.
Can I just interrupt you for just a bit? So is that book about heuristics or no?
No, but it's about two systems of the mind. One system which is recognition based. It seems to be hard coded. It doesn't have software per se. It has no culture. It has no. So we train it with stimulus and response and association. And for example, if I was to show you 1,000 cards in the space of less than a second per card, you would still actually have some residual recognition for the majority of the cards. That's not your conscious brain passing that information. That's your recognition. And we know that animals have recognition because we know they have something called episodic memory, which is where they can associate 3 or more variables. So if they see an acorn, they not only remember other acorns, but they can also remember where they were when they saw the other acorns, possibly even what season it was. So we know that this recognition faculty is really well developed in some animals. So yeah, I suppose actually I have to backpedal a little bit again from my backpedal and say that actually animals probably can do the pattern recognition very well, but possibly only for the type of problems that they're programmed for, and certainly for the patterns that their ancestors have seen and have kind of evolved into. This would be my position, I think.
Okay, so but I mean, for monkeys which are quite intelligent, they can still, I think, do simple calculations, right?
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know, if you place a bee in front of two screens, one showing a 3, or, you have some sort of calculation and they get food at the end of it, maybe they cannot make the bridge.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. And when we say calculation, like, what do we mean? Because
that's right. Actually, I'll give another example before that. Have you heard of Hans the horse?
Oh, the one that could remember things, or
I think,
is it?
Yeah, pretty much remember. I think it was. It was used either in a circus or just as a popular kind of animal.
Oh, the counting horse. The counting horse.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It could tell you the day that you were born, or do complicated calculations or something like that. Maybe you can say more about.
So that one's an iconic one. In several books, I think they refer to Hans.
Right.
And what they'd done is they'd used behavioralism to train this horse. Such that it could respond to very subtle social cues. So they would give it two numbers, add it together, but then it wasn't responding to the numbers at all. It was responding to the trainer who was giving a very subtle social cue. So there you have an animal who is solving a problem, but it's a first order problem. It is when my trainer winks, I do this, I get food. There's no logical steps.
Right.
So that's what Kahneman's first system does. It's a recognition system. First order, one step. And so I guess when you say calculations, I actually think of something quite different, which is a couple of steps. I retrieve a concept from memory. I do certain operations on it, and then I act. And actually, I don't know if there are any animals that do that. I'd be interested to see in research on dolphins and higher primates. But that one might be a little bit elusive. The relationship between arithmetic and language is only just getting discovered, and it may be that when we learned how to speak, we learned how to count as well. And I can't stand behind that, but certainly there's been a lot of work deriving the rules of linguistics from arithmetic and vice versa. And they does seem that they appeared on the scene at the same moment. So the perception of quantity shouldn't be confused with arithmetic, if you see what I mean.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, maybe the thing that I would say about computation is just having this abstract idea of a number, which is beyond me. I mean, I don't even know how I have it, and then what's one? You can write it in many ways, but it's like such a, you cannot put your hand on it. It's
absolutely, and no one even thought to ask that question until Frege. And Frege in the 19th century was the first person to even think, what is one?
What's the name of, sorry?
Gottlob Frege.
Right.
He was he was part of that whole Gödel period where they started to ask these fundamental questions.
Oh, right. Okay.
What is a number?
Is this, I'm not sure, because I've read just a little bit of Immanuel Kant, but that's not related to his way of representing, as in he considered space and time something that is interlinked with who we are, and we cannot really represent the world in anything other than space and time. But I don't know if he went up to numbers or talk about that. I don't know.
Yeah, so it's a good comparison. So I think Kant and Frege are actually, first of all, they're countrymen. They're both Germans. And
like all philosophers are.
Like a lot of important philosophers do seem to have been, although Gödel was Austrian, which I'm not sure we count that as a different one, I'm not sure. As something, kind of a little aside, one of the main reasons that Bertrand Russell became so successful is because his nanny was German, so he could read all these books when most people in England... So it's quite an interesting trick.
From a very early age.
Yes, that was one of the tricks. He could read German, Latin, and Greek. So it's quite an advantage when you're at that time and Google Translate hasn't been invented yet.
For sure.
So Kant's big picture is he definitely looked at those things, but I'm more talking in terms of maths.
Yes. Okay.
Formulating the concept of unity of one. To do that rigorously, it turns out is very difficult.
Of course.
and Frege was the person who started that process.
Right, and you correctly referenced to Bertrand Russell because he was one of the main mathematicians that started asking about the foundations of mathematics and
yeah. So he read Frege because he could. Almost nobody until Bertrand Russell discovered Frege, no one knew who he was. No one cared, pretty much. And then Bertrand Russell managed to pull out some of the paradoxes from Frege's axioms. Sorry, not from his axioms, but from the conclusions of his axioms. And then Gödel comes along. In my mind, Gödel, the greatest problem solver maths has ever seen, and breaks it. Well, Leibniz or Gödel, one of those two.
Oh, wow, okay. I didn't expect you to actually choose Gödel.
Yeah, I don't know. He's just so...
Maybe you can tell me one. I mean, I'm roughly familiar with the incompleteness theorem and the fact that he would go on long walks with Einstein in Princeton.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
von Neumann as well.
And also he committed suicide.
He's
or I mean, out of I don't know. He starved himself because he thought that the food was poisonous or whatever. But I mean,
that was it. Yeah.
Anyways. But yeah, I mean, I just know these very short snippets of his life, but otherwise I don't know about his ability other than that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in no way a trained logician. I did a maths undergrad and I did an applied maths master's, so I used like the predicate calculus, the logic, the logic we all use with the implication signs and the equivalence. But Gödel. If you want to talk about heuristics, Gödel is a very interesting character.
You mentioned that he also wrote.
He wrote extensively,
yes.
And he promised us that he was going to write a book on heuristics, but as his health deteriorated, he never did. Possibly the greatest heuristic ever conceived of is, in my opinion, Platonism, which is the belief that the world is a world of shadows. But the true world is a world of form, and that's and it's almost a quasi-religious, and it goes hand in hand. A lot of people who are Platonists also believe in God, and Gödel had what he believed to be a proof of God, as did Leibniz, and because you believe that the world has this kind of truth to it behind the scenes, you look deeper than other people do. So at the time that Gödel was working, there was a prejudice that all truth was symbolic truth, or all that truth didn't really exist and there was just syntax. It was the revolution of the Turing machine and axiomatic systems and set theory, and people just decided that proof must just be the manipulation of symbols. That is one heuristic, but then the alternative is Platonism, which is the one that Gödel had, where you look deeper into the problem, believing there to be a truth on the other side, as opposed to it just being symbolic manipulation. And Gödel won with his incompleteness theorems. He showed the work preceding him to be largely prejudicial. And sorry, please.
Maybe point to a book that actually talks about this back and forth between Platonism and.
Yeah, so Simply Gödel is a very good book. Very general, just a really, somebody who loves the subject matter and the people he's writing about, and gives everybody the best. Like he does that you've got the straw man argument. He does the steel man argument. So he gives everybody the strongest possible version of their argument in the book, and it's just really good.
The steel man argument. Wow.
The steel man argument. Yeah,
I like that one.
Yeah. And it's just interesting that all the great problem solvers seem to have been Platonists, well, not all, but enormous number. It just seems to be this heuristic, and it's true. It drives you. If you believe that there is some truth behind what you're seeing, it would drive you to a completely different set of conclusions than if you believed it was all just work.
No, I really like the topics that you touched upon. Before we go any further, I would just want to ask this question before I forget.
Yeah.
So we were talking about animals and problem solving. Do you have a problem solving animal? Or maybe let me ask you a different question. If you were to take your problem solving personality and associate with an animal, what animal would it be?
Probably squirrel, actually.
A squirrel, okay.
Yeah,
Nice one.
Squirrels are like the
No,
ultimate
tell me more.
animal mathematicians. They're so lazy. If you want to trap a squirrel, I mean, probably you've never had occasion to trap a squirrel.
Yes,
I
I
have
haven't.
had occasion to trap a squirrel. What you need to do is you need to find the easiest way up the tree. Because the squirrel will find the easiest way up the tree. Because the squirrel is very, very good at geometric problem solving and very lazy. So usually, because they've got very sharp claws, they'll come up underneath and just kind of hang and just crawl. And so, yeah, you should put your snare on. You've got to work out what the easiest way up a tree would be to something with very sharp claws, and then you put the snare there and you'll catch it.
Right, so that means that when you face difficult problems and the easiest solution that comes to mind doesn't pan out, what do? You freak out? I don't know what a squirrel does.
Oh, I come and find you, Chris. I come and find, no, genuinely. I go, oh, who's the smartest person I know that knows something about this?
Definitely that's not true.
No, I genuinely though, I collaborate. If I hit a dead end that I think that's going to be. I think we once said it to you. I said it to you. My supervisor, my master's supervisor, used to have this idea of the heavy lifting.
Oh right. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was always like, oh, you need a young man to do the heavy lifting, and that's what you're going to do. So I look for someone to do the heavy lifting. That's what I do, just like a squirrel.
But yeah, for a squirrel, who does the heavy lifting? I mean, so a squirrel kind of only goes for the easiest solution, and then it kind of gives up, or because I don't really know anything about squirrels.
Yeah, so they won't give up per se, but they're not industrious animals. They're real survivors. Like in a survival situation, you have to be lazy.
Okay. So yeah, just using little energy. If they cannot, they will just move to the next tree or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, being efficient with just the tools that you have, you try to solve it, and then if you cannot, then you just move. And I mean,
exactly.
It's a problem-solving personality. Sort of. Yeah, I would say it's a personality. Maybe it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Who? What would you be?
So the animal that I kind of chose for myself is a gorilla.
Interesting.
Because
talk me through it.
I feel as if, again, I'm not really, I just know how gorillas act from watching, I don't know, YouTube videos or whatever, but not an expert of any kind. But I feel as though a gorilla, when it faces a problem, kind of faces it full force for a little while. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or something. And, if it doesn't succeed, then it kind of grumpily goes away. That's me. That's very much me. Like I have a difficult problem in physics or something else, and usually what I do, I make sure to attack it in the morning, the first thing in the morning, like after I go through my routine of waking up, taking a shower or whatever. But then like the first mental activity that I do is face the problem, and I go full force for an hour or two. And if by the time that I reach the 2 hours I have absolutely no new insight, then I'll be grumpy for sure. For sure. But then the next day I attack it again. That's kind of my attitude.
That's a great heuristic. I think also you've got to give yourself a bit of credit. 2 hours is a long time. In terms of creative, difficult work.
Okay.
2 hours
that's
is
my
a
limit.
long
That's
time.
my limit for sure.
Yeah.
I would say 2 hours is kind of long. 1 hour, I'd say it's achievable on a normal basis. Like if I really have a difficult problem and I go full force.
My dream is to have a life such that I can dedicate 2 hours every day to just something hard and creative.
Wow.
That would be peace, wouldn't it?
Awesome. Yeah, of course, yeah. If and I guess, I mean, there was one book that I've heard of being referenced a lot, and that's the author escapes me right now, and actually also the name of the book. Oh my God, 1 second. Yeah, let me come back to it maybe later. So the book itself talks about the creative act, and cannot name.
It's not Creativity by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Sorry.
It's not the book Creativity by
No,
Mihai
no, no, no,
Csikszentmihalyi.
no. It's a book about interesting character. He wrote a lot of history books. American, um,
American
has done a
historian.
lot of odd jobs, and then he has written this book. Um, I don't know. Yeah,
Interesting.
maybe
Yeah,
I'll reference it for sure. I mean, I'll put the description in the video or something.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
the book talks about the ritual behind basically writing a book. The guy is an author, right? And
Yeah.
he talks about his process of going every day and trying to write 2 or 3 pages, and the thing that he does, and then he names a few concepts, like you have to have a muse
Yeah.
that you need to call. It can be like a representation in your head, or it can be a person. And then you
Yeah.
also have to have a ritual, like once you wake up, you do the same things, and then once you sit behind that table and you start writing, the words just come to you, because
Yeah.
it's an automatic response to the ritual. Now it's time to work. Your brain kind of, maybe it's
Yeah.
the fast part of your brain that does that, maybe because you've
Yeah.
gone through a full pattern, and now it's like the end
Absolutely.
of it, and the expected outcome, it kind of flows out. Also talks
Absolutely. So
about
important.
territory, and the territory, actually, I found one of the most useful examples, or concepts that he talks about.
Yeah.
The territory, from what I remember him defining it, was a fair place where the amount of effort that you put in is giving you exactly the amount of outcome that you
Interesting.
actually expect. So it's
Yeah.
like fair. Once you put in the hard work, you get the outcome at the end.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I was thinking about what are my territories, like if I think about it, and
Yeah.
at that point I think one of my territories for sure is the gym.
Interesting. Interesting.
Because you just put in the work, and but then again, it's interesting, because you have to think. Maybe some people have expectations of how much effort they put in. Maybe for
Yeah.
them, like a little bit of effort. For some other people, it's like no effort at all.
I
So
think. Listen, I resound so strongly with everything you just said. I think one of the things you see as a teacher. So teachers, we don't have that much power to teach students. I can help you learn, but I can't really
Right.
teach you much. So yeah, absolutely. So I think well, what I've seen with creative people is they feel a sense of betrayal quite easily, possibly more easily than other people. So because I think it's so there's a book called Creativity by the author of Flow, the Hungarian psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which I can't recommend highly enough. And he talks about how truthful and vulnerable and open-hearted you have to be to do creativity well in almost any field. And I think because you have to let your guard down so low, if you put in all that work and nothing happens, you can be deeply embittered by it. And I think that happens on a micro scale as well. So that's obviously the grand tragic artist image. But I think on a micro scale, when a child learns something, they have to be quite vulnerable. They have to give it their all and be ready to fail. They don't mind failing as long as it's fair. But if they've had a string of teachers maybe who haven't necessarily been able to help, or they've been betrayed, not in a way they didn't understand. I'm not saying that a teacher has done the wrong thing, but more the fact that they didn't understand the feedback they got. I think that sense of betrayal can go quite deep. So I think if you can create an environment where it's fair, like they go away, they get everything wrong, and they go away that day going, yeah, fair. I was rubbish today.
Right.
I think if they give it their all, and they don't really understand why they didn't succeed, I think it can be really rough. And I think that's how students get turned off of education. I think if you could give them that fairness, kids would fail all day, every day, quite happily, and improve.
But you started by saying that creative people are usually the ones that feel betrayed very easily.
Yeah, in the macro. So in the large sense, I think particularly artists, poets, writers. Yeah.
So are we talking maybe it's all people engaged in a creative process when they don't meet this effort equals results, they feel betrayed?
I think they can do. Yeah, I think they can do, and I think you got to think about the time frames it takes to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of rejection, right?
Yeah,
And so,
yeah.
particularly for a poet, where you're probably going to be successful 30 years after you start, you're going to be poor for that entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what happens is, and also, so in the book Creativity, he
Mm-hmm.
looks at the amount of time you can spend on a given creative discipline, and he finds that poets are the shortest. So you said 2 hours for that physics problem. He found on average that poets worked somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours a day. Um, inc-
That's not the full amount that they work, no?
that's the full amount they work.
Right. And we are also talking about burning out on just a day of work, not burning out for the entire, like, just
So I get
assigning this much time in your whole life for this subject.
no, yeah. So sorry, I'm mixing time frames.
Okay.
I'm talking about burning out in the short term and burning out in the long term.
Right.
But I guess I'm just trying. So I personally believe that the 2 hour for certain disciplines you just can't put in longer than a couple of hours a
Mm-hmm.
day, otherwise you'll hurt yourself. And I think when you think of it, work that's that intense, and then you don't get any results, and maybe you don't get any results for 2 years, maybe you don't get any results for 5 years, maybe you don't get any results for 10 years. At what point, depending on the person, is that motivation going to run out, and you start to feel very cheated, and then you start turning on yourself?
Just to add something to this point,
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe poetry kind of falls into this category because possibly there is no routine thing that you can do to also do your
That's
job.
Yes,
Because if you're a
absolutely.
painter, you kind of, once you kind of set the scene, okay, now I just add the color or something. Like it's
Yeah,
at some point it just becomes routine. Now I know what to do. I don't have to think about it. The creative process is, it's already
yeah,
done. Now it's just work.
yeah,
But for a poet, it's kind
absolutely.
of, you just have a pen and you write some words. I mean, it's
And
you
it's just
cannot
you.
really
It's
go
just your
for five
soul.
hours just writing, and
No,
then choosing the best
no.
bits or something.
Yeah, that's why I think you can have like people who write historical fiction. So like say Tolstoy. Tolstoy wrote seven drafts of Anna Karenina, seven maybe 8 drafts of War and Peace, and we're like, oh my god, wow, that's so much work. And bearing in mind he was writing pen and paper, so it's super
Right.
impressive.
Wow.
But he was writing about the Napoleonic Wars in War and Peace. So there's always something you can do, right? You go and do a bit of research, you
Mm-mm-mm.
talk to people. Hilary Mantel, who is a Booker Prize winner, who went to primary school near my house.
Oh,
She
awesome.
writes these huge books, but they're historical fiction. So she spends her day in the archives, and then at the end of the day in the archives, maybe she writes for an hour,
Mm-mm.
you know. But then you compare that to poetry, like you say, it's just you. And if you're not good enough, you're just not good enough, you know? That's
Oof.
painful. That's a
Yeah, I
really
mean,
scary,
when you
that
say
must
things this
hurt.
way, yeah, for sure, for sure.
But then science is lovely, right? Because you can always find something out in science, right? Not theoretical physics. Theoretical physics is different. But like if you
I
were
mean,
if you're an ecologist, you could always go somewhere and put a quadrangle down and find something.
yeah, or maybe I just go through some experiment, and you always can find something for yourself.
Exactly.
But I think even with science, it's you can always find a new book or you can try a new approach. It's not there are for sure routine things that you can do, and also if we
Yeah.
come to theoretical physics, you cannot imagine. But sometimes you need to do integrals that are kilometric. So you can always attempt, to to go a few lines more down the line or something like that.
Yeah.
The the thing that I found out, and I'm still finding out as I go, as I will be writing my second master dissertation,
Hmm.
is that yeah, in science, even though we think of these of scientists as creative people and great problem solvers, sometimes a lot of science is just routine work.
Just routine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just day to day. We like to think of to ourselves that I'm gonna become a physicist or a scientist, and then I'm gonna do this awesome stuff. And then
Yeah.
when it comes to it, you just sit in front of a computer a long a long period of
Yeah.
time every single day, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of definitely a lot of routine going into what science is actually like.
Yeah.
But yeah, as we go now to being a poet, yeah, I don't know, beats me. I don't think there is something like a routine thing that you.
It's a painful way of life. Beautiful, but painful way of life.
Oof.
I'd much prefer to be a scientist. You know, go to the lab, I drink some coffee, talk to my friends.
Even though there is very little certainty in an academic career, but I think
there is that.
poet kind of beats everything. Being miserable,
Yeah.
be a poet today, be miserable. Like
Yeah.
it can be a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apart from that, probably a poet. It's a great example. So did it come from this book, Creativity, that you mentioned?
Creativity, yeah. It's a great companion text actually to Heuristics, I think, because so what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi does really well. So this is a really interesting example. So he was quite old when he wrote this book. So when he was a much younger man, he wrote Flow, much more famous. And I put off reading Creativity, thinking, oh, it's just a guy who's had one big idea. It's this next book's not going to be that interesting, but it's so interesting. And he starts off by trying to ask the question, what is creativity? And he dedicates a chapter to that. And the conclusion he comes to, I can't really do it justice, but it's beautiful, and he sets it within this concept of a field, which I think you alluded to something similar at the beginning of our talk. The field is the subject, but also the individuals in that subject and the process of convincing them. Peer review, whether that be formal like you have it in science, or whether that be less formal like you have it in some other disciplines. But his idea is your work is creative, if it changes the field.
Okay, interesting.
And that has enormous implications.
Much more practical view to.
Yeah, and it has all sorts of problems as well, because if you have that view, then sometimes theoreticians, artists, whatever, they become more creative after they're dead, and then also less creative. So while these guys have been dead and they've not written anything, their creativity is changing.
Right.
So it's a super bizarre metric, but the man thought about it for 10, 15 years, and you've got to like humor this conclusion for a while, and it's the way I've come to think about it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, we have to give the guy some credit for sure.
Yeah.
15 years. Oof.
Yeah, Steelman. And he interviews Nobel Prize winners and Booker Prize winners, all sorts of different people to get to that conclusion.
Now that we talked, we put another discipline into the mix. So we had like sports, we had maybe some animal problem solving, some poetry mixed in, scientists, and so on. Now going a little bit more philosophical, can we say that, because now we also compared like the human with some animals in terms of problem solving and so on, and it seems as though animals are kind of made for only one task. You cannot judge one animal to do the job of another, but it seems like humans are pretty good at pattern recognition in a more like higher sense than an animal is. Can we say about a human that it is a natural problem solver in the same way that human kind of maybe needs a sense of religion, right? Either he believes, or a sense of there is something above and beyond what we can experience, and so on, or the need. Does the human have a fundamental need to be looking for a problem, right, to solve?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. I think very much. Again, that definition of problem solving. At very least, even in an animalistic sense, kind of what we were talking about first order problem solving, just pattern recognition, we solve problems all day, every day. But as do animals, in that one step thing. Right. But yeah, in that multi-step thing, do people have need? Is a human being need to solve those kind of multi-step, challenging, creative problems?
Yeah, actually today, just to interrupt you, I was watching something, and it just came there was a quote made in the thing that I was watching, like a human is always like it's made to solve complex problems.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So,
I absolutely think that is that is a big part of the human experience. I think maybe also something that's interesting is like the role of agency, like selfness to problem solving. In order to, so Capablanca, who's a chess player, said you must start with the end in mind. The Romans had some phrase, I can't remember it, which was about always keeping in mind, like always keeping your goal in mind. You have to have a goal, and you have to kind of identify with that goal, and you can, in order to constantly come back with it. I think that's something that Polya doesn't really address, possibly as, which is something that I see, that the more developed the will in the child, the easier they find that idea of coming back to the unknown, because they want to know. And if you don't want to know, I think it's very hard to come back to that unknown repeatedly.
But you need to make a personal association with the goal. As in, you need to care about the goal, right? I mean, the goal is kind of clear. When you say, like, solve this problem, you kind of, okay, solve this problem. But if you don't care about it, you're not going to come back to it.
If you don't care about it, also, like, if you have no... So if you're just looking for a recipe, i.e. you have no personal connection to the next step you're going to make, then, yeah, why would you scrutinize it? You just get it wrong, you get it right. It's more like, it's like playing roulette. You can turn maths into gambling. I watch kids do it all day. They just, I'll just try that.
I mean,
no, okay, who cares?
To be honest, when you say about a roulette, do you mean that they are just trying out different stuff to solve a problem, or what do you mean?
Exactly, because they've got me there and they've got the textbook there.
Right.
So if they're wrong, they're wrong. If they're right, they're right, and they don't really care one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of problem solving is just that, trial and error. And
it's interesting you say that. I see that kind of that Polya comment of what is the unknown. That kind of starting with the end in mind. In chess, maybe chess is also a good comparison. Like chess is fun whether you win or lose. Like I'm completely addicted to internet chess.
Oh, it's wow! I didn't know that about you.
Oh no! So lockdown, I just did what everybody else did. We all got addicted to internet chess. We all watched the Queen's Gambit, and we all just started playing chess. Yeah, 100%. And you know what the funnest way to play chess is? Friday night, after you've like had some drinks with some friends, you come back home, you have a couple more beers, and you just play chess. And your chess goes downhill all night long. Your rating goes from 1600 or whatever you were at, goes all the way down to 1100. And do you enjoy it less when you're losing? No. In some ways you enjoy it more because you don't really have to think.
I never thought about a night of drinking and chess.
So loads of people did it actually. Ben Franklin. So the man who said the man who said early to bed, early to rise makes a man something Solomon wise, actually never really struggled to get in bed early, because what he used to do was he used to go to his friends' houses and play chess until like 4 a.m.
Seriously? Wow.
Yeah. Stanley Kubrick, the filmmaker. It's a proper addiction for some people. I'm not quite at that stage yet, but like I'm getting close. But it doesn't. The problem is it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. So in a given position, when I should be thinking about all the permutations, I should be thinking about my material, i.e. the pieces I have on the board. I should be thinking about what I'm trying to accomplish. I should be thinking about tactics. I should be thinking about strategy. When I lose that kind of personal agency and I get to that point in the night where I don't really care anymore.
Let's just
it all just goes terrible. And I think that that ethical part of problem solving. Polya mentions it a little bit. He talks about the students that act before they understand the problem. And conversely, students that spend too long trying to understand. Right.
Can we actually go into that part of the book for a little
absolutely.
bit? So the first part of the book about in the classroom, the chapter is called, talks about what you can do as a teacher to help the student reach the solution. Can you develop on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've come to think, I used to be a technician. I used to believe that there was a right way of teaching a certain content. So by that, I mean that each subject would have its own like logos, if you will. And And if you could capture that logos, you would be able to impart that to a student and they would never make a mistake again. You know,
Right.
you could solve it for a student, like the whole thing. But actually, I as I've been in teaching longer, I've started to think about that the ethical component is might even be the whole thing. And it's interesting the way you think about the great educationalists like Plato, I mean, to be honest with you, people you probably wouldn't have heard of just because they're not necessarily famous outside of education, but they're all ethical philosophers. They all concern themselves with the ethics of action, right and wrong behavior, and I think it's because learning is a behavior.
No, it's just interesting for me to use ethics in this context. Okay, so right or wrong way to act in solving a problem. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so so it's an interesting distinction, right? So like Plato didn't think that behavior was right from some sort of objective sense. He did refer to God, but he didn't necessarily think that. He thought it was right from the perspective of the good of the city-state. So it was an ethics of organization in his case. Right action is the action that the citizen who will protect the city-state displays. And so an ethics of action. And I was on a really interesting call with a guy who works from one of the fanciest private schools in the country, and his job is to prepare students to apply for Cambridge and Oxford.
Right.
And you'd think it would be all about maths, but that's not what he talked about. He talked about modeling, so doing something that a student can imitate, encouraging students to become better people, you know, encouraging them to develop grit and determination. It was all about the ethics,
right?
Because the individual in the end is the most important part. And again, I think Polya acknowledges that a little bit when he says kind of the kind of what I would consider ethical problems, students who don't spend the time to understand the problem, they just rush off. But I don't necessarily think he thinks enough about it. But your actual question was, can you dig into kind of what a teacher can do to support?
Yes, in the classroom. But before we go into that, because I found your example with the teacher colleague that you have.
Yeah.
So he's, I assume, also a maths teacher, or no?
He's an interesting guy, actually. He's got a PhD from Cambridge in natural sciences. He became a maths teacher, I think, slightly later into his career because after his postdoc, he taught kind of some basic undergraduate courses at Cambridge for a bit. So he did PhD in natural sciences, something about plant genetics, which blew my mind because it never occurred to me that you could do plant genetics. I always thought of genetics as an animal thing, but of course plants have genetics as well. And he had to do a lot of maths as part of that. And that's often a weak point in chemists and natural scientists, that their course or their research particularly requires a lot of maths, and they possibly don't have the preparation.
Right.
I've made quite a lot of money tutoring chemists in maths, at least, so this has been my impression. Then he did a postdoc. I think he wanted to be an academic or wasn't really sure, and then he went into teaching maths. And because he had this Oxbridge background, he was given all the opportunities to coach the Oxbridge students.
Okay. So now we are talking about coaching, not tutoring.
So he was tutoring in the sense that he teaches the content. He does teach the maths, but what you do find is you're always coaching a little bit.
Yeah.
Because they're children. And that's always going to be quite a big part of the job. So yeah, I use coaching there a little bit dismissively.
Sure.
Maybe I shouldn't use the word coaching. But really, no, to be honest with you, with something that difficult, they have to do it. So it does come down often to coaching. And that's what he talked about. He talked about the fact that, so we had this really long call, maybe like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And he just kept coming back to this idea of he sits down and he does the problem. And then he does the problem in front of them. And then the moments in which he gets confused are important as the moments which he can explain, because the students have to understand that's okay.
Okay, but him as a teacher gets confused and then he explains where he gets confused?
He tries. But But what he's getting at is that the individuals, it's not a science. There's not technical. You can't guarantee
of course.
that the student will always get it right, and they have to be comfortable in an environment where it's normal not to get it right. And these are kids who are super smart.
So he kind of shows some vulnerability by getting confused. So that I see this as from a psychological perspective, but as an approach, I was a bit confused myself, because I find that many times if I get confused with a problem, it's usually not the same point where somebody else gets confused. So I don't know if it really helps to answer my confusion. It usually helps to concentrate on the other person.
Oh, right. So you're talking about the situation where you've tried a problem, and the other person's confusion
doesn't match mine.
Yes. Yeah. But in some ways, isn't that perfect? Because then his confusion isn't actually going to interfere with your learning process. Because the moment he's confused, if actually you can explain that bit to him, it's the other bit you need. Yeah. So I find that all the time in teaching. So my favorite, of all the Polya ideas from the classroom, the A-star one, is the gold standard, making up questions. I don't know if you remember that bit of the book.
Yes, no, I do because I found myself so much in that one. Yes,
I've been doing that constantly with my students. It's so good because that's the creative act. You know, the creative act is to take these objects, 100%. Which we have gained some familiarity with, and we try to reconstruct them in a beautiful way, and then we will try and pick apart what we've done and see if that has some meaning. And yesterday I was doing that. It was a really funny situation. There's this really stupid thing on A-level spec, which is a hypothesis test.
Right.
But comparing the distribution of means in normal distributions. So this thing is arcane. So there was me and there was a Warwick mathematician there, and we were trying to explain this idea to a kid, and both of us felt kind of bad because you kind of have to use some version of the normal of the standard the central limit theorem, which they've never seen before.
Right.
You have to use limit theorem, which they've never seen before. And then the final approach is actually really nice, but to understand it, which a good student should, is almost impossible at that level. But then to kind of make that better, I was just like, okay, can we invent a normal distribution question? And they were like, I was like, well, come up with something. And some people say some things are sensible, like human weight. I'm like, yeah, that could be normally distributed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people say they're like length. I'm like, length of what?
Exactly.
And he's like, and then the kid's like, of a pole. I'm like, a pole? He's like, yeah, length of a pole.
Even that actually, it's not bad.
I'm like, oh, okay. Do you know what? It was a funny one, so I rolled with it. We're like, okay, well, let's do the length of a pole then. What's the standard? What's the mean? And he's like, 1. I'm like, 1 what? He's like, a meter. I was like, okay, a meter. What's the standard deviation? He's like, 10. 10 what? Like 10 centimeters. Like you got a standard deviation on your pole manufacturer of 10 centimeters. But in that we're making meaning. In a way we couldn't otherwise make it, right? We're connecting those ideas to the reality that they represent, and it was a really nice process. But then we got to this really funny situation where I thought a question we'd invented was impossible because it's not an exam question. So I do a lot of preparation on the textbooks and the exams, and this question was basically the expectation. At what point does the expected number of this pass some threshold? And I couldn't see it, but they could, you know. And by the end of it, the entire class were trying to explain to me why it was a possible question, and I was absolutely flatly refusing that it was possible. Yeah, and in the end, I just had to give one of them the pen. I was like, "Go on, then, you explain it," because clearly it can be done. I just don't.
You made the connection.
I'd named one of the variables in a really counterintuitive way, so it was actually by construction that I found it confusing, and because they'd done it themselves and they'd named it differently, it was a different problem.
No, 100%. So I just want to come back to this point that you made about also being phrased differently, and also creating problems for yourself. So I've actually done another episode on teaching physics.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
we discussed a bit on this point. In physics, usually problems are made on purpose difficult because they are explained in the sentence, the way
Right.
that they're worded,
Yeah.
they leave a lot of ends untied. Let me
Yeah.
put it this way. And then you don't know
Absolutely.
exactly how should you go. I mean, there can be many ways,
Yeah.
but if you just phrase it nicely and correctly,
Yeah.
sometimes at least it's clear. If it's difficult, okay. But at
Yeah.
least it's clear. But
Yeah.
sometimes I think many times, at least for problems that are not necessarily too difficult, that are given in exams, some I don't even know how to call them, but the people that actually make those problems, sometimes they
Yeah.
do word them badly just so
Absolutely.
they make people make mistakes, and I don't get why.
No.
But it happens. It happens many times.
Absolutely.
Physics more than anything I've encountered.
And it's interesting you say physics, because I would say that happens in mechanics a lot as well. Yeah, so I think you're bang on the money, and that's what you see when you make up questions with the students. So what you'll see is that some students who are very good at the approach really struggle to make up the questions, and it's because they don't understand. And some students who get confused by the questions, possibly because they're misworded, can really, really fluidly make up questions. And so you get to see a different side of the students, and maybe learn a little bit more about what is it actually that they're finding difficult. And so I think that's the gold standard. That's changed my approach
creating
completely.
your own problems.
Make up questions
I
with them.
fully agree. And I think this is one point that I made before in the other podcast. I mean, this is the only way that you can really learn something for yourself.
Yeah.
Testing it out, doing something for yourself, and it can be applied on so many things. For example, we are a consumer of so many things. I mean, we can, music videos or whatever, music films or whatever. But when it comes to actually the point of, and this actually links to understanding, to the point of creating something for yourself, then it's kind of the place where you actually test your understanding.
Absolutely.
Because just being on the receiving end of something, it's never enough to get a full picture. And you need to create. Definitely the creative part, it's part of I mean, now talking about problem solving and understanding and creativity, I mean, these are all interlinked, but definitely there is something to be said about creating something, you being the problem creator, not necessarily only the problem solver.
Absolutely.
That gets you to a better understanding of maybe problem solving in itself, and maybe even understanding. But now this is not a conversation about understanding. But I think there is something to be said about problem creator and problem solver. Like this.
No, absolutely. Dynamic. And I actually think so. One of Polya's little questions is, "Do you understand?" Which I think, it sounds like such a trivial question, but what he means by it is, are you thinking about the situation, or are you thinking about the syntax? Because don't think too much about the syntax. Is just notation. The notation represents something. Are you in control of what you're writing about? So I think understanding is huge, and I really do think that creation of questions allows you to take those objects and recombine them. Then they belong to you. Because the exam question, that belongs to someone else. That's a test for you. But your question, that's something you're making. You can express yourself. You can express your love of wooden poles of standard deviation 10 centimeters. That's you. Nobody else is going to come up with that. That's a really dumb thing to come up with. But
Can I ask maybe a question related to this? Because when there is something to be said about some sort of mental comfort when you understand something, and being able to. I don't. Okay, maybe this is going to maybe philosophical, but I don't think you create something you cannot understand, or maybe it's maybe too philosophic, right? Said in this way. But when we talk about creating problems, I think it's it's the comfort of knowing what these problems are, knowing the tools that how to solve them, and then you create something that's in the realm of, you know, what you've seen so far. I mean, it's something that you're
Yeah.
comfortable with fundamentally, and then you just, you know, you compute something. But
so that's a beautiful question. I think as a mathematician, you're generally right that mathematics we build up from axioms, we build up from fundamentals. So yes, something we create, we understand. I do wonder, is that true of creative people in general? In actual fact, I think that's almost certainly not true of creative people in general. Paradise Lost, famously John Milton set out to vindicate. He set out to show that how bad the devil was and how good God was, and then he creates this story in which the devil is like
a motivation. This. Really,
my understanding is, and then he creates this story of the devil being a freedom fighter and God being a tyrant. And he didn't. It was not his intention.
Yes.
But that's what the characters that he created. That was their natural formulation. I think when you write, so I've written a very small amount of fiction, and some poetry as well. And I do think you create stuff that you're like, where did that come from? You know, because it wasn't me. Isaac Newton, to take it back to physics, he was fundamentally uncomfortable with what he discovered. He spent the rest of his life trying to like work around the fact that he'd created this system by which forces could act at a distance.
Yep.
Yeah. I think things can, and that's why the Greeks had the idea of genius, wasn't it? You have a genius because it's not you, it's somebody else.
Yeah.
It's a genie.
Right. And I think this is part of the book that I mentioned before that I still cannot name. Yeah, the genius was another. Just as much as the muse.
Yeah.
Like the genius, you know, you kind of have to go through a ritual, and you know, we come back to this idea of ritual.
Yeah.
To kind of summon, you know, that part of yourself that helps you in this situation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, I guess one more example, Gödel. I think spent a lot of the rest of his life trying to understand what the incompleteness theorem meant. Even though he came up with it.
Oh, it's a question that for sure I will come back to after this podcast.
Yeah.
It seems that you convince me otherwise, for sure.
Maybe think about it, and maybe we'll both switch sides next time, and we'll have it the other way around.
Who knows? Related to the classroom and how can a teacher help the student? Can we define a few ways, a few methods maybe of solving problems? And before doing that, is mathematics all problem solving, or is there something more to it?
I think there's something more to it. I think
okay, we can leave it at that. We don't if you feel comfortable or you know
no, absolutely. Good. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe the one thing I would add is that possibly the Neoplatonists, the modern day Platonists, believe that the entire universe is a mathematical object. Sounds silly. I think when you think about it more, it's disturbing how realistic it seems. If the universe is a mathematical object, suddenly maths becomes like theology, like almost like something else, right? Anyway, let's
a topic for another time.
Another topic for another time.
Yes, a few methods of solving problems in mathematics and generally computer science, because that's what you teach. And
so computer science is so lovely because the computers we deal with can do like a couple of things. So I get my students to look for 5 things in the problem. So I get them to look for any loops, look for the for loops, look for the while loops, look for any decisions. If you're dealing with more advanced students, you may need to talk about recursion, but I don't have to talk about recursion. Input, output. I always forget the 5th one. There's 5 things.
Right.
Find them. It's just pattern recognition. Just find them.
Yep.
Coding is actually remarkably straightforward comparatively with maths, I would say. In terms of maths, there are certain gold standards. I really like Polya's what is the data?
Yes.
What is the unknown?
Just to strengthen that point a little bit, this is actually what my physics teacher would always say during high school. Because he would give me a problem, and it's always like the first thing that he would do. And I don't know, I found it like a habit that I actually have now. When you have the problem, you read it, and then you first read it once, then you start like you state all the unknowns or the knowns that you have. Maybe it's a density or maybe or whatever, and you write it like it's this density and this is what you do.
Yeah.
This is the second time that you read, and the third time you actually start solving it. So it's always
Absolutely.
like you name your data clearly. You know it's there, and then you start the problem. So it's a very important step, very definitely.
And it's funny, right? So like a veteran problem solver, like yourself, or kind of when I'm in the classroom, and let's say me and a student start a problem together, and then the student will say, I don't understand. I'm still reading the question. So the student who should be more junior to me has read the question, tried it, and already decided he can't do it. And I haven't finished reading it. So like, and I think it's because they've not categorized things properly. They've not spent the time, like you say, to identify the knowns, identify the unknowns.
Yes, I used to have this bad habit as well, like reading it quickly and then not naming anything at all, and then it seemed a lot more difficult. But if you just do it, go through these simple steps, can clear out a lot of things.
And the key is the little look of disapproval you give them when they interrupt you. You're like, you just look up and you're like, I'm still reading. Okay, it's fine to not understand, but can you like give me 2 minutes to read the question? And can you read the question? Because that's what they remember. They remember. Yeah.
After the disapproval look,
it's because what they need in the exam, they need me, right? They need to think about what I would say. So they need to be able to do that to themselves. So when they don't get it after 30 seconds in the exam, they need to feel the disapproval that would have been cast on them to themselves. Like, wait, of course I don't get it.
Do you do that mentally, like when you, or at least you did back when you had like a teacher that you were close with? Because I mean, I assume there is a personal relation that, when you think about, okay, how is, Thabo, how would he react to this kind of problem?
Absolutely.
Because if, like in university, you have so many professors, but you're never close to them. So I would never think like, how would this professor think about this problem? It's only your supervisor, kind of your mentor or something. But my question is, do you find yourself doing that?
Yeah, all the time. So I always think if you can get a laugh out of the class while you give them some bad news, they'll not only accept the bad news better, but they'll remember it better. And like, so my dissertation supervisor, who's a guy I really respected, like, so he wasn't even on the list of projects. Supervisor, I really liked his approach. I thought he was an excellent teacher. I was already a teacher by the time I did my master's, so I had some basic reference. And I chose him specifically because I really just liked the way he approached things. And he had this. He was a Dutch guy, and I remember one time, like, I asked him to help me with this thing. I can't remember what it was, and he says, and he got really excited, and he was like, "No, this is a really good problem. What you need to go away, and you need to spend some hours, and if you spend some hours, you start to understand, and then you can come back."
Some people will get offended.
Is there anything more upsetting than somebody you asking them for help and they tell you to spend some hours?
Gosh.
But because I respected the guy so much, I listened to what he's saying, and what he's saying is not everything's free. I could tell you, and then you wouldn't understand. Go away and do the work. But because he says it in a nice way, and because I respect him, I suddenly accept it. And I find myself doing that. So I find myself getting frustrated. Maybe I'm trying to learn something. Recursion is a real weak point for me. So like, graph algorithms are a real weak point for me. So I'm trying to learn some graph algorithms, and I'm frustrated. And then I look at my watch. I've been there for 20 minutes. Are you entitled to achieve something difficult in 20 minutes? And then I hear his voice, hey, this is a nice problem. You spend some hours, you'll understand. And then so I tell my kids that story early, first, like second, third lesson. First time we do something hard, I tell them the story, and I hear them saying it to themselves sometimes and saying it to each other. Because then it's a fun thing, right? It's
it's a fun example. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So absolutely, sometimes if you can make the story sticky enough. And again, like at the beginning, I said I actually think that in some ways, Polya's comments are more for the teacher. But I think what I mean by that is that they're not conceptual. They're almost like behavioral triggers. They're cues.
Yeah.
So like what's the unknown? Maybe the student understands that, or maybe that's just a trigger for them to read the question again. I don't know. Maybe what's the data? Maybe that's a real question, or maybe it's just a trigger for them to read the question again.
Yeah.
And I think spend some hours is a nice cue, because it's like you communicating to yourself about yourself. I have not been here that long. This is hard. I need to spend some more time on this. I need to work at this. It's a cue to recognize a behavior in yourself. Laziness in my case.
But yeah, going back to one of your comments from before, it's an interesting thing with problem solving and the role of a teacher or a mentor in problem solving. Like you said, you still have to do the problem yourself.
You still got to do it yourself.
Yeah, that's such.
Still got to do it.
Yes. I find that I don't know. I found it very resonating. Very fundamental also.
Imagine how depressing that is for a squirrel who's trying to find the easiest way up a tree. To just be like, no, you still got to climb the tree.
So it's such a personal thing. Like you have to do it yourself. It's.
Yeah. So there's a book called Foundations of Mathematics by a guy called Ian Stewart, and in it he talks about self-explanation. So to him, understanding of maths is like actually a very constructivist type perspective. So it's not that you deduce the meaning of maths. It's that you build the meaning of maths, and the way you do that is you explain it to yourself. And so that's kind of what you mean about personal, I think, as well, that you build it up yourself. I can't beam it into your head, unfortunately, because you're restructuring your brain almost.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, when you do solve it, you become a different person. That's
the ethics, right? A better person.
But yeah, also a better person, I think.
I believe so.
Being a worse problem solver, I don't know if it if it can be like if it can be a good thing. I don't see it that way for sure. Now thinking a bit about solving problems and when we start actually doing it, would you say that, like, I mean, school basically is the first time when you, maybe kindergarten, you start solving problems in kindergarten, or is all education, at least the one that we are supposed to be given in the 12 years or 13 years, depending on the country that you're from, is that supposed to be only problem solving? How is education related to that?
So it's an interesting question. I think you've kind of I'm about to have a baby. I had been pondering. Thank you. Yeah, a big moment. In preparation, not even preparation for that actually, but my partner and I, we always knew we wanted to have kids. So I read a book called Raising Genius by Laszlo Polgar. Laszlo Polgar's daughters changed chess forever. And the interesting thing about him is he knew he was going to create chess champions before they were born. So in his search for a wife, he was open about the fact that this was his life's goal and his life's work, and that they should be serious about it. Before him, there were no female grandmasters. There were no there'd been no like European champs or anything like that were women. And what's interesting is in his diary, he before his daughter was even born or conceived, he writes, "I hope I have girls, because they won't be able to ignore me if I have girls. If I have boys, they might be able to say, oh yeah, but they were naturals or something like that. But if I have girls and they are great chess players, no one will be able to ignore that."
Right. There is something about his education or his input that
exactly, and so unique. And Judith Polgar is still considered to be the greatest female chess player of all time, and his other daughters are some of the best as well. I've lost my train of thought. Problem solving in children. So I'm reading a lot about early years problem solving, and it's really interesting. The best thing a child can do for maths, certainly, is get them, like when they're really, really small, get them to collect things that are the same. Turns out this is the beginning of problem solving. Right. They're the same. You know, and if you think about it, what even are we doing when we problem solve as adults? It's some it's some species of collecting things, that it's some species of sameness, you know,
categorizing maybe.
Categorizing, what's missing, what's there. They're asking all the same questions, at least in a prototypical sense. So collect shells, you know.
Yes.
Get them to separate the shells into the correct piles. Get them to see if they can find other piles they can separate them into. When you want to evolve, you go to patterns. So, but I don't necessarily mean patterns in the sense of like fractals or something clever. I mean literally like weaving. Like, can you get them to weave together different threads in a pattern? Can they identify symmetry? There are 15 types of symmetry, visual symmetry, something like that, and kind of going through each of those. Can they categorize those different types of symmetry? So that, and actually, I would say that British early years education is probably not one of the leaders, because the kindergarten system, the Swiss are very good, as are the Belgians and people like that, and as are the Swedish. But Britain's pretty good at early years, I would say. So yeah, I think you can rest assured that in those very early years, kids in England have quite good problem-solving exposure. There's big questions about after that, but at that point, yeah, I think pretty good.
So are we talking up until 7 or similar?
Yeah, that's a pretty good number. Yeah, the problem comes, I think, when it comes down to start writing. We start writing much earlier than our European counterparts, and then our academic experience becomes almost like a stereotype of an academic experience where children practicing their handwriting, or like learning grammar or whatever. But it's wildly counterproductive. On the continent, in the kindergarten, they learn these things a couple of years later. They do it much faster, and at the end of it, they are much better. We do too much too soon in terms of academic rigor, and we don't spend enough time on problem solving. So yeah, I'd say exactly what you said. Up to about 7, it's pretty good. After 7, maybe not even 7, maybe more like 5. After 5, when kids learn how to read, British education falls behind because there aren't the problem-solving opportunities. We're fixated on academic rigor being the use of pen and paper.
Would you... this is kind of an open question, but would you say that... now maybe this is more related to intelligence. I heard it, maybe you can actually say it better than me, that intelligence is made up of nature, nurture, and I think the effort that you put in, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, what do they say? They I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can word it any better. I think intelligence is a really interesting. I think so. I think intelligence is kind of like those animals, right? The animals that might be specialized for a certain task. I think it's actually quite hard to define intelligence in any meaningful way that doesn't acknowledge like the diversity of things you can be intelligent in.
That's right. But the question that I wanted to ask is about education, as in the formal way and the informal. Informal exposure that you have to problems and problem solving. I mean, is it because I feel as though sometimes kids that experience not so much formal education, but maybe they are in rural places and they have all sorts of problems and they need to find their own solutions. I mean, I find that sometimes I would consider them even more creative and insightful than the kids that only follow a formal course of education.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Isaac Newton famously was a very mediocre student. Spent multiple years at home rather than at school, just working on the estate. I think it was always the counterexample that I would give to Ismail when he was telling me that computers were intelligent.
Right.
And I would, so Ismail being our mutual colleague for the listeners, and he would say about the intelligence of computers, and I would say, well, what are the abilities of a 6-year-old in the Amazon rainforest? Well, there are some tribes in which it is normal for a 6-year-old to go out with a bunch of other 6-year-olds, hunt down a tarantula, put a stick on the tarantula's back, pull the legs up, tie the legs together, toast the tarantula and then eat the tarantula. If you are 6 and you are hungry in the Amazon rainforest, this is what is expected of you.
Yes.
This is a lot more exacting than arithmetic. This is a lot of problem solving. And actually, Yuval Harari, the guy who wrote *Sapiens*, makes this argument. He's very much convinced that the human race is getting stupider on a individual basis, because the level of cognitive stimulation that the natural world provides just being so much higher. When you think about the physical abilities, the spatial awareness
which are other metrics of intelligence.
So it's interesting. So if we were to measure intelligence in birds, we would do it almost exclusively by spatial reasoning.
Right.
And they are. They're on an IQ test. You measure your spatial reasoning.
Yes.
But the linguistic element is obviously going to be a lot less. Anywhere where the population is denser, they'll have higher linguistic associations. But I guess what you're saying is it's a time-honored belief. And my understanding is also that human craniums have been shrinking since agriculture.
That I think I've heard of it. Yeah, somewhere.
So the human brains might actually be getting smaller. So not only might you be right,
getting more efficient, not necessarily because
it's an open question.
Okay, it's not like a truth. Okay, I don't.
No. It's just an interesting metric. Like if you believe that what we do now is very much more sophisticated, you would say it's because we're getting efficient. If you believe that it's because it's what we do now is less sophisticated, you say it's because we're getting stupider.
True.
It's just a perspective.
Of course. Maybe just to complete a bit the question. So maybe the informal education kind of exposes you to much more diversity maybe than the formal one. So maybe that's where the kind of difference comes from.
And as a teacher, I see it all the time. Kids who work with kids whose dads are carpenters or whatever. And or their dads are tradies. I work in some sort of manual trade, and I set them a contextualized geometry problem. They're way ahead of their peers, and it's not because they're smarter. It's almost like they're more comfortable with it.
Yes,
they're like, oh yeah, I can visualize that. Because from very young, their dad has been like, go and bring me the 2x4.
Yes.
Or like, do you know what I mean? So I think it's visible in the classroom, ironically. There's that kind of experience.
Now, in the time that we have left, I would want to talk a bit about the difference between physics and mathematics and their approaches to problem solving. So, Thabo, you have graduated from a mathematics university. And you've done a master's, so you've done a lot of mathematics. Now, I have touched upon mathematics only briefly in some courses that are more mathematically oriented, like differentiable manifolds and whatnot, which is the basis for general relativity. But usually I'm not, let's put it this way, when a course is very mathematical, it kind of goes outside of my comfort zone. So
mine too. And any mathematician telling you otherwise is lying.
But but did you find some topics comfortable during university, or how was problem solving in university in a mathematics environment? Because I can speak a bit about the physics environment.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is almost a shame about higher mathematics is I think there are probably people with talents for higher mathematics that don't have a talent for lower mathematics, but they never get to the higher mathematics.
Right.
I think you find your niche. My niche has always been calculus and applied. Calculus problems I've always found very intuitive, rates of change. It's very natural to me. And obviously there are places where your intuition breaks down. Places like partial differential equations in certain contexts get very confusing.
Yes.
But the intuition disappears. But nonetheless, I would say that the approaches are just intuitive. I also really like logic. So in an analysis is very boring because you have to remember all the theorems. But the actual approach I think is very beautiful. Then there are places where it gets very hard and unpleasant.
What were the most difficult ones? So, as in talking about problem solving, because the way that I think about physics is that you are taught some theory, and then you have some problems, and at the end of the course you're supposed to be able to solve. You don't.
Yeah.
Okay, Okay, I mean, if I'm like, if I am to say the truth, the way that, I mean, how should I put it? If I am to be honest about exams in higher education and so on, up to PhD. Okay, when it comes to PhD, it's a different story. But I wouldn't say there are intelligent exams in that.
Interesting.
In that way. I mean, there are difficult topics that you have to approach, and you need to learn, the theory. But at the end of it, you're expected to kind of reproduce what you've already learned.
Yeah.
Even though the questions that you are being given, it's not something that you have seen fully. It's very similar to what you have done before. So a person just taking enough time to go through all the problems will kind of see the solution. So in that sense, I think university is never at the level of a competition in either mathematics or physics. The skill that you need to approach those types of problems, because I mean, yes, university gives you that background in sorts of many problems and many different types of problems. But when it actually comes to the point of solving or creating a problem, or solving a difficult problem, those 5 years that you've done up to the masters, I think it's not quite cutting it. So I think that's maybe a PhD kind of gets to the level of being like a competition level of difficulty in terms of problem solving.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say. So I guess, I completely agree. I think higher education maths exams are nothing special. It's not that I've done amazing in them, but absolutely, if you do all the past
of course
ones,
I mean, there is some level of difficulty, but you practice long enough, I think everybody can get 100%.
I completely agree with that. So I guess then really what you're asking about is research, and kind of some maybe a bit of background. My research project was the use of reinforcement learning in the solving of partial differential equations. Very interesting problem, but then possibly that we leave problem solving behind a little bit, because I'd say that the real challenges were meta problems, or like they're creativity based. I have to set my problem up in a way where I'm going to be able to see the mistakes I make. That's very different than writing an exam, and that's I guess it requires a lot more understanding. So I mean, maybe it's not even that different. So you need a very strong intuitive grasp. So you do need to do the practice problems. You do need to do the exercises in the textbook, so that you have a sense. But then when it comes to doing the actual work, you need that self-awareness to go, well, I got all of those wrong when I practiced them the first time, and the only reason I was able to do it correctly was because I looked in the back of the book. Maybe that's not the formulation of the problem I should approach, because maybe that's not what I can do. There's a story about Neumann. I can't remember what Neumann's great contribution was to maths. Category theory, maybe.
I mean, there's many contributions.
Many contributions.
I don't know which one is the greatest.
Let's pretend that Neumann contributed to measure theory.
Okay.
And the big problem that he solved because somebody proved that it was isomorphic with something that he'd already done. So if he was an expert in category theory, this big problem, somebody showed that it was actually the same as another problem in category theory, and he famously said, well, if it's category theory, I can do it. And 10 years later, he did it. Awesome. And I think that's maths, right? You have to know your strengths. It's just like sports.
Yes.
So actually, I would like to take this opportunity, considering we've not got much time left.
Yes.
You mentioned competition.
Yes.
So
I would want to talk about that.
Yeah. So as head of computer science next year, I'm thinking about what are the things that I want. What are the external activities that I can use to inspire my students to achieve? So forgetting exams, forgetting me as an instructor, I want them looking beyond me. So I want them looking at the field of computer science, and I kind of want them also to be looking at themselves comparatively with their peers. So I'm currently thinking hackathons, maybe competitive programming.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on competition for improving academic skills?
So are we talking now generally or computer science in particular?
Computer science, maths, physics, any Olympiad on which you have any opinion.
Okay, so it's a general question.
Yeah.
Because we can, I can try to answer very specific to computer science also.
I'd like both answers actually, if they're available.
So in terms of a more general question now, I will focus on mathematics and physics because this is what I'm used to, and this is what I've experienced during school. But from the age of maybe 10 up to 18, I was always involved in some sort of mathematics or physics competition.
Yeah.
Probably 11 or 12, something like that to 18. And I think it's one of a great opportunity to celebrate the problem solving as an art. I really think it's one of the greatest things that you can get involved in while you are in school. If you are in any way passionate about mathematics, physics, or solving problems in general. Because I also think there is something to be said. Okay, I see art as also a big source of problems and also of problem solving capability. But I think there is something to be said about these quote unquote hard subjects in school that you need to be able to approach at a competition level to be able to appreciate it really. Because if you just do the stuff that it's in school and the stuff that you're going to be examined on at the end of high school or something, you never really truly appreciate what you can do with your own mind, But when it comes to actually approaching these mathematics or physics problems in an Olympiad format, I think there is another level, it's a completely new level. And, people, of course, usually associate Olympiads with something very difficult, only the smartest people go. And, I guess that's true, to be honest. I would say that the people that go to Olympiads are the smartest people in school. And... So your question was what?
So I've got 100 follow-up. Yeah, I actually want to ask a follow-up question. So you talked about your own personal experience. You said you did it from age 10?
Maybe 11, 12 to 18.
11, 12. Who got you involved in the first place?
So initially, I think it was just competitions were very common. I think in like the Eastern Bloc, Olympiads and competitions are super common. I don't know why. When it comes to mathematics and physics, they're very well seen today. Many people, even today, they are participating, but even more so before. So it was always very highly seen, and it still is because it deserves it.
Yeah, the national, like the
national
Soviet
Olympiad, and then international, and so on. One thing that happened in Eastern Bloc schools, at least in Romania, schools had a quote for how many people to send to Olympiads for each discipline. So it was kind of the duty of the teacher to send.
Was this during communism?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they had a quote. It was compulsory. So they always had not necessarily they didn't prepare the students. Many people did, right? But some teachers would kind of just pick the best two kids and you need to go because this is the quote, you need to do it, But
it's something that frustrates me actually about our education system is that the private schools give students that opportunity, they take it seriously, and in state schools we only care about exams. Because the government in this country only cares about exams. But I've got more questions.
Yes.
If you were, because this is super useful for me in preparation. So at what point, so let's say that at what point in a student's academic development in physics do you think they would be the optimum to start for most students? So you said 10. do you think maybe, like from looking at your colleagues and your peers,
Yes.
Was 10 perfect, or would 13 have been perfect? Would 15 have
So
been
when
perfect?
it comes to actual, I mean, we have to keep in mind when schools actually have physics in the curriculum. So that starts at about, I think, 13.
Yeah.
So kids up before 13 don't know what physics is because they don't have it.
So how did you go?
So for me, I actually started doing physics when I was 14, and I was already in high school. At 14, I was in high school.
Right. So before then, the competitions were maths competitions.
Yeah, exactly. I only went to the mathematics Olympiad. I never did really well because I didn't take my time. It wasn't a passion for me, but it's something that I was comfortable with, and I said, why not? So I kind of went for it.
So do you think actually the maths Olympiad is the appropriate preparation for computer science Olympiad, for example, because you're exposed to it so much younger and there's the opportunity?
I would say there is surely some transferable skills from one to the other. But usually, the stuff that you approach in a mathematics Olympiad at the age of, 10, 11, 12, 13, I think it's not the sort of problems that you will ever approach in computer science. You're usually given geometry or some formulas to deal with, but with computer science is definitely not the case. It's maybe permutations and
permutations, graph theory, that sort of thing.
Yeah, if there was more overlap, then definitely it would be a good starter. But otherwise, I don't think it's like really necessary, right?
So in terms of turning it, so obviously you're a very specific type of person. Anyone who knows you know that you thrive off of competition. How do you make it more accessible to students who maybe they're super creative and maybe they're really into their maths and computing, but actually competition isn't something that gets them motivated, but you still want them to be exposed to that environment? Do you think there's a way of mediating it?
Yeah. To be honest, I think it's one of the things that was very detrimental to me at the start was comparing myself to others, when it comes to the mathematics Olympiad or the physics Olympiad, because I had peers that were much better than me. And when it came to actually being in a straight competition and not collaborating with them, it kind of took all the joy away from it. But when I started actually thinking about, just improving myself and concentrating on my own abilities, then it's collaboration, it's easier. And I to be honest, I think it's just collaborating with the people with the right mindset. So the people that are if they want to go to competitions, you should kind of spend more time with them. I think collaboration cannot be beaten in this.
That's a brilliant answer. So in terms of collaborating, would you say that, so I don't actually know the format of the Olympiad. The Olympiad's individual contest or team contest?
So I haven't participated in a computer science one, but I have friends that did. And it's you're by yourself. But I think at some point during the National Olympiad in Romania, at least, there was a collaborative component. So the same that it is with the physics one. But when you go to international, you kind of, you're on a team of 4 or 5 people and you solve together the sets of problems that you're given.
And I think that would be a lot more motivational to a lot of students and accessible. Because let's be honest, the students that want to compete as individuals will find a way of competing with individuals because they're so driven. But I'm more interested in the ones that maybe are a bit borderline and like you say,
they're not sure.
They're not sure, and also they don't necessarily want the I don't want to call it aggression, but competition is aggression, isn't it? Honestly.
Yeah, it is. But I would say that a safe environment in which you can be aggressive and not get hurt too much. That's
I mean, you and I agree, but but I've been kickboxing and grappling since I was a child, and I love to fight. So I don't know what normal people feel like. I mean, you're a jiu-jitsu player as well. Like
So
there's other ways they've seen the world.
Of course. Maybe I haven't considered this before, but maybe it's just like a general sort of advice. Because if you do a sport, if you play a sport, then you kind of have this mentality like it's stronger in you. But when it comes to actually strengthening the interest of a group of people into a certain discipline, because I mean you are the teacher and so on. I mean, and the kid is borderline.
But if he's in a team, then maybe
I would
if
say
she is in a team,
only a team of people that are like-minded, and make him spend some time with the other kids. And if he finds joy in doing that, I think you're on the right track. But if he doesn't, definitely doesn't find joy in doing that, then I don't think it's
I mean, you've given me a lot to work with there. I love that idea. Maybe even so you're in a class. So I do paired programming with students sometimes, and do kind of paired programming equivalents in maths as well. But yeah, why not make it a bit of a contest? Split them into groups of 4.
Yeah, I mean that would be
and then
fun.
Just they can have
or like a mini hackathon.
Exactly.
You give them a problem, and that would be fun.
So what I would quite like to do. So you could take this as my manifesto. So my vision for my department is, so the kids are super driven. This is a very aspirational, motivated, working class environment, which has all the building blocks of something special. But what I want to do is create the best software developers in the city.
Wow.
And so currently I'm thinking about
the best doing that.
Yeah.
It is a hard task.
It's going to be a hard task, but the first thing I was thinking of is like, okay, how can I prove that I'm better than King's Maths College? And so I was thinking about things like hackathons, thinking about things like Olympiads. Like, could we invite them for a home game, or go to them for an away game?
That's an awesome idea.
What's the format?
Collaboration above competition, like that.
My best 4 versus your best 4. Do you fancy it? Yeah, that kind of thing.
Like a 1-to-1.
Literally.
School to school. Wow.
They'll fight for our honor.
Wow.
Yeah, and because then right? Because it may be that otherwise we're basing it all off of grades. What do grades mean?
Yeah. That's
but if we win in some sort of objective contest like that, well, suddenly we can say we're the champs. And that's the kind of thing that raises.
That's a really fun idea.
Yeah, and I know a few department heads, and
I mean to be willing to kind of do school versus school one-on-one or something, that would be pretty hard to manage. But if it's like in a competition throughout London or something, like more to get more people involved, maybe it's even gonna be easier for you.
Do you think just because it's too aggressive to be like, we'll play you?
No, maybe just because it's a lot of time spent for you to organize it. Because it's not a common thing to do, but if there was a framework behind it already that many other people would do, that the job would be much easier.
Certainly, looking for pre-existing. So there are always hackathons. There aren't that many for young students, but there's nothing stopping an A-level student going to an adult hackathon.
Sure.
I guess something where you can manage the minutiae. So I'm really interested in competitive programming. I think competitive programming is a really interesting format. But then maybe it's not just the perfect format for what you're trying to accomplish. Maybe certain schools don't attend those events, in which case you can't get that comparison. So I was trying to think about a way around it. Yeah, you're right. Maybe the return on investment isn't there, but I'm still kicking around ideas.
So okay, your goal is to make as many people very good at software engineering.
Yeah. Like really good.
Really good. Yeah. I think definitely some sort of competition needs to be there, like to get that the best. I mean, again, when you say the best, it's kind of comparing with other people, so it's competition. It's anyway predefined inside the problem.
It's true, and I guess excellence refers to yourself, doesn't it? And best refers to everybody else. But I think you need competition to mediate that. When I sat the STEP papers, the Cambridge admissions papers, I wasn't trying to go to Cambridge. I was trying to go to Warwick. They have the same tests. That was the first moment where I realised that my A stars in maths were worthless. That's an important moment, because I went to a college which was in a very poor area, and the kids didn't have very academic backgrounds. I was the top dog. And the truth was I wasn't a top dog. I just never met the real top dogs.
Right.
And I think that moment is very good for your soul. I think for me, if it had happened earlier, it would have been much better. But the problem is that I was already 18 by the time. Oh no, sorry, I was a bit older because I was an older student. But it was too late for me to change the way I was preparing.
Yes.
Whereas I want the students to have that experience as early as possible, so that they can adjust a little bit. If they want to be the champions, they can adjust.
Yeah, definitely introducing competition, and maybe even trips that you can, so for them to get together and but trips like with a goal, right? We do this, and it's also for them to know each other. Yeah. And also to do this thing.
Feel like a team.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Definitely helps. And I think, the high school is kind of the perfect period to kind of do that.
Perfect. Yeah. And particularly for the nerds, right? Because the nerds aren't playing football.
Of course.
They're not playing football, so they don't have that team environment.
And if they're introduced to, this huge community of people that, actually work on projects and in their free time and so on, it's amazing.
No, I'm excited. I got goosebumps, genuinely.
Good luck. Also
Thank you.
Luck with this goal. It's actually a noble goal, I think.
No, I hope so.
Helping others better themselves, as a teacher, but more so as in becoming the best version of themselves. Like this is
being a better person.
Even better. So Thabo, thank you very much for your time. I really, really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, as always, Chris, it's a pleasure. Thank you for the incredibly carefully put together questions. They're going to have me thinking for a long time, I think.
My pleasure. I'm happy that they made you think. And I also hope that they made the viewers and the listeners think as well. So we'll wrap it up here. Thank you again, Thabo, for participating. I hope we can do another one soon.
Absolutely.
And thank you very much for listening. I will see you on the next one. Ciao.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.